Chapter 37. The Beginning. When he looked back, even a month later, Harry found he had only scattered memories of the next few days. It was as though he had been through too much to take in anymore. The recollection he did have were very painful. The worst perhaps was the meeting with the degree that took place the following morning. They did not blame him for what had happened. On the contrary, both thanked him for returning Cedric's body. Mr. Diggory sobbed through most of the interview. Mrs. Diggory's grief seemed to be beyond tears. He suffered very little then, she said, when Harry had told her how Cedric had died. And after all, almost, he died just when he had won the tournament. He must have been happy when he got to their feet. He looked down at Harry and said, "You look after yourself now." Harry seized the sack of gold on the beside table. "You take this," he muttered to her. "It should have been Cedric's. He got there first. You take it." But she backed away from him. "Oh no, it's yours, dear. I couldn't. You keep it." Harry returned to Gryffindor Tower the following evening. From Hermione and Ron told him Dumbledore had spoken to the school that morning at breakfast. He had merely requested that they leave Harry alone, that nobody ask him questions or badger him to tell the story of what happened in the maze. Most people he noticed were skittering him in the corridor, avoiding his eyes. Some whispered behind their hands as he passed. He guessed that many of them had believed Rita Skeeter's article about how disturbed and possibly dangerous he was. Perhaps they were formulating their own theories about how Cedric had died. He found he didn't care very much. He liked it best when he was with Ron and Hermione and they were talking about other things, or else letting him sit in silence while they played chess. He felt as though all three of them had reached an understanding they didn't need to put into words, that each was waiting for some sign, some word, or what was going on outside Hogwarts, and that is what, unless to speculate about what might be coming until they knew anything for certain. The only time they touched upon the subject was when Ron and Harry told Harry about meeting Mrs. Weasley had with Dumbledore before going home. She went to ask him if you could come straight to us this summer. He said, but he wants you to go back to the Dursleys at least first. Why? Said Harry. She said Dumbledore's got his reason, said Ron, shaking his head darkly. I suppose we have got to trust him, haven't we? The only person apart from Ron and Hermione that Harry felt able to talk to was Hagrid. As there was no longer a defense against the dark art teacher, they had those lessons free. They used the one on Thursday afternoon to go down and visit Hagrid in his cabin. It was a bright and sunny day. Fang bounded out of the open door as they approached, barking and wagging his tail madly. "Who's that?" called Hagrid, coming to the door. "Harry." He strode out to meet them, pulled Harry into a one-arm hug, ruffled his hair and said, "Good to see you, mate. Good to see you." They saw two buck-sized cup and saucer on the wooden table in front of the fireplace and they entered Hagrid's cabin. "Been having a cup of Olympi," Hagrid said. "She just left." "Who?" said Ron curiously. "Madame Maxim." "Of course," said Hagrid. "You two made up, have you?" said Ron. "Don't know what you're talking about," said Hagrid airily, fetching more calf from the desert. When he had made tea and offered around a plate of dog pocky, he leaned back in the chair and surveyed Harry closely through his back eyes. "You all right?" he said gruffly. "Yes," said Harry. "No, you are not," said Hagrid. "Of course you are not, but you will be," said Harry. Said nothing. "Knew he was going to come back," said Hagrid and Harry. Ron and Hermione looked up at him shocked. For years, Harry knew he was out there. Been this time it had to happen. Well, now it has, and we'll just have to get on it. Well, fight might be able to stop him before he gets a good cold. That's Dumbledore's plan anyway. Great man, Dumbledore's long as we have got him, I am not too worried. Hagrid raised his bushy eyebrow at the disbelieving expression on their faces. No good sitting worrying about it, he said. What coming will come, and we'll meet it when it does. Dumbledore told me what you did, Harry. Hagrid's chest fell as he looked at Harry. He did as much as your father would have done, and I can give you no higher praise than that. Harry smiled back at him. It was the first time he had smiled in days. What's Dumbledore asked you to do, Hagrid? He asked. He sent Professor McGonagall asked you and Madame Maxim to meet him that night. A little job for me over the summer, said Hagrid. Secret, though I'm not supposed to talk about it. No, not even to you lot. Madam Maxim to you might be coming with me. I think she will. Think I got her persuaded. Is it to do with Voldemort? Hagrid flinched at the sound of the name. Might be, he said evasively. Now, who had liked to come and visit the last crew with me? I was joking. Joking, he added hastily, seeing the look on their faces. It was with a heavy heart that Harry packed his trunk up in the dormitory on the night before his return to private drive. He was dealing with living feast, which was usually a cause for celebration. When the winner of the Inshore House Championship would be announced, he had avoided being in the Great Hall when it was full ever since he had left the hospital wing, preferring to eat when it was nearly empty to avoid the stares of his fellow student. When he, Ron and Hermione entered the hall, they saw at once that the usual decoration were missing. The Great Hall was normally decorated with the winning house's color of the leavening feast. Tonight, however, there were black drapes on the wall behind the teacher's table. Harry knew instantly that they were there as a mark of respect for Cedric. The real Mad-Eye Moody was at the staff table now, his wooden leg and his magical eye back in place. He was extremely twitchy, jumping every time someone spoke to him. Harry couldn't blame him. Moody's fear of attack was bound to have been increased by the 10-month imprisonment in his own trunk. Professor Karkaroff's chair was empty. Harry wondered as he sat down with the other Gryffindors where Karkaroff was now and whether Voldemort had caught up with him. Madame Maxim was still there. She was sitting next to Hagrid. They were talking quite togetherly. Further along the table, sitting next to Professor McGonagall, was Snape. His eyes lingered on Harry for a moment as Harry looked at him. His expression was difficult to read. He looked as sour and unpleasant as ever. Harry continued to watch him. After long, Snape had looked away. What was it that Snape had done on Dumbledore's order? It might that Voldemort had returned, and why? Why was Dumbledore so convinced that Snape was truly on their side? He had been their spy. Dumbledore had said so in the pensive. Snape had turned spy against Voldemort at great personal risk. Was that the job he had taken up again? Had he made contact with the Death Eaters, perhaps? Pretended that he had never really gone over the Dumbledore? That he had been like Voldemort himself binding this time? Harry's musings were ended by Professor Dumbledore, who stood up at the staff table. The great hall, which in any case had been less noisy than it usually was at the Living Feast, became very quiet. "The end," said Dumbledore, looking around at them all, "of another year." He paused, and his eyes fell upon the Hufflepuff table. There had been a more subdued table before he had gotten to his feet, and there were still the saddest and placest face in the hall. There is much I would like to say to you all tonight, said Dumbledore, but I must first acknowledge the loss of a very fine person who will be sitting here. He gestured toward the Hufflepuff, enjoying our feast with us. I would like you all please to stand and raise your glasses to Cedric Diggory. They did it, all of them. The bench scrapped as everyone in the hall stood and raised their goblet and echoed in one loud, low, rumbling voice Cedric Diggory. Harry caught a glimpse of Cho through the crowd. There was tear pouring silently down her face. He looked down at the table as they all sat down again. Cedric was a person who exemplified many of the qualities that distinguish Hufflepuff House. Dumbledore continued. He was a good and a loyal friend, a hard worker. He valued fair play. His death was affected you all. Whether you knew him well or not, I think that you have the right, therefore, to know exactly how it became about. Harry raised his head and stared at Dumbledore. Cedric Diggory was murdered by Lord Voldemort. A panicked whisper swept the great hall. People were staring at Dumbledore in disbelief, in horror. He looked perfectly calm as he watched them mutter themselves into silence. The Ministry of Magic, Dumbledore continued, does not wish me to tell you this. It is possible that some of your parents will be horrified that I have done so, either because they will not believe that Lord Voldemort has returned, or because they think I should not tell you, so young as you are. It is my belief, however, that the truth is generally preferable to lies, and that any attempt to pretend that Cedric dies as a result of an accident or some sort of blunder of his own is an insult to his memory. Stunned and frightened, every face in the hall was turned toward Dumbledore now, or almost every face over at the Slytherin table. Harry saw Draco Malfoy muttering something to Crabbe and Goyle. Harry felt a hot, sick soup of anger in his stomach. He forced himself to look back at Dumbledore. There is somebody else who must be mentioned in connection with Cedric's death, Dumbledore went on. I am talking, of course, about Harry Potter. A kind of ripple crossed the great hall as a few heads turned in Harry's direction before flicking back to face Dumbledore. Harry Potter managed to escape Lord Voldemort, said Dumbledore. He risked his own life to return Cedric's body to Hogwarts. He showed in every respect the sort of bravery that few wizards have ever shown in facing Lord Voldemort, and for his I honor him. Dumbledore turned gravely to Harry and raised his goblet once more. Nearly everyone in the great hall followed suit. They murmured his name as they had murmured Cedric's, and drank to him, but through the gap in the standing figure, Harry saw the Malfoy grab Goyle, and many of the other Slytherins had remained definitely in their seats, their goblet untouched. Dumbledore, who after all possessed no magical eyes, did not see them. When everyone had once again resumed their seats, Dumbledore continued. The Triwizard Tournament aim was to further and promote magical understanding. In the light of what happened of Lord Voldemort's return, such ties are more important than ever before. Dumbledore looked for Madame Maxim and Hagrid to Flora Delacour and her fellow box-bottom student to Vector Crumb and the drumstands at the Slytherin table. Crumb, Harry saw, looked Barry, almost frightened, as though he expected Dumbledore to say something harsh. Every guest in the hall said Dumbledore, his eyes lingered upon the dumbstruck student. Everyone back here at any time should they wish to come. I say to you all once again, in the light of Lord Voldemort's return, We are only as strong as we are united, as weak as we are divided. Lord Voldemort's gift for spreading discord and enmity is very great. We can fight it only by showing an equally strong bond of friendship and trust. Differences of habit and languages are nothing at all if our aim are identical and our hearts are open. It is my belief, and never I hope so that I am mistaken, that we are all facing dark and difficult times. Some of you in the hall have already suffered directly at the hands of Lord Voldemort. Many of your families have been torn asunder. A week ago, a student was taken from our midst. Remember, Cedric. Remember, if the time should come when you have to make a choice between what is right and what is easy, remember what happened to a boy who was good and kind and brave because he steered across the path of Lord Voldemort. Remember Cedric Diggory? Harry's tongue was packed. Hedwig was back in her cage on the top of it. He, Ron and Hermione were waiting in the crowded entrance hall with the rest of the fourth year for the carriage that would take them back to the Hogsmeade station. It was another beautiful summer day. He supposed that private drive would be hot and leafy, its flower bed a rare of color. When he arrived there that evening, he thought gave him no pleasure at all. Harry, he looked around. Flora de Locora was hurrying up to the stone step into the castle. Beyond her, far across the ground, Harry could see Hagrid helping Madame Maxim to back to the giant horse into their harness. The Baxterton carriage was about to take off. We will see each other again, I hope, said Flora as she reached him, holding out her hand. I am going to get a job to improve my English. It's very good already, said Ron in the straggling sort of way. Flora smiled at him. Hermione scrawled, Goodbye, Harry, said Flora, turning to go. It's been a pleasure meeting you. Harry's spirit could help but lift slightly as he watched Flora hurry back across the lawns to Madame Maxim, her silvery hair dripping in sunlight. Wonder how the Drumstank students are getting back, said Ron. Do you reckon they can steer that ship without Karkaroff? Karkaroff did not steer, said a gruff voice. He stayed in his cabin and let us do the work. Crump had come to say goodbye to Hermione. Could I have a word? He asked to her. Oh yes, all right, said Hermione, looking slightly flustered, and followed Crump through the crowd and out of sight. You had better hurry up, Ron called loudly after her. Carriage will be there in a minute. He let Harry keep a watch for the carriage, however, and spent the next few minutes craning the neck over the crowd to try to see what Crumb and Hermione might be up to. They returned quite soon. Ron stared at Hermione, but her face was quite impassive. I like Diggory, said Crumb abruptly to Harry. He was always polite to me. Always, even though I was from Drumstrang with Carcroft, he added, scrawling. Have you got a new headmaster yet, Harry? Said Harry. Crumb struggled. He held out his hand as Flora had done, shook Harry's hand, and then Ron's. Ron looked as though he was suffering from sort of painful internal struggle. I had already started walking away when Ron burst into, Can I have your autograph? Hermione turned away, smiling at the horseless carriage that were now turning toward them up the drive. Ascrum, looking surprised but gratified, signed a fragmented on parchment for Ron. The weather could not have been more different on the journey back to the King's Cross than it had been on their way to Hogwarts the previous September. There wasn't a single cloud in the sky. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had managed to get a compartment to themselves. Pigwidgeon was once again hidden under Ron's dress robe to stop him from hooting continuously. Hedwig was dozing, her head under her wing, and Crookshank was curled up in the spare seat like a large, furry ginger cushion. Harry, Ron, and Hermione talk about fully and freely than they had all weeks as they turned them southward. Harry felt as though Dumbledore's speech at the living feast had unrocked him somehow. It was less painful to discuss what had happened now. They broke off their conversation about what action Dumbledore might be taking. Even now to stop Voldemort only when the lunch trolley arrived. When Hermione returned from the trolley and put her money back into her school bag, she dislodged a copy of a Daily Prophet that she had been carrying in there. Harry looked at it, unsure whether he really wanted to know what it might say, but Hermione, seeing him looking at it, said calmly, "There is nothing in there. You can look for yourself." "There is nothing at all. I have been checking every day. Just a small piece of day after a third task saying, 'You won the tournament.' They didn't even mention Cedric, nothing about any of it. If you ask me, Fudge is forcing them to keep quiet." "He'll never keep Rita quiet," said Harry. "Not on a story like this." "Oh, Rita hasn't written anything at all since the third task," said Hermione in an oddly constrained voice. As a matter of fact, she added, her voice now trembling slightly, "Rita Skeeter isn't going to be rewriting anything at all for a while. Not unless you want me to spill the beans on her." "What are you talking about?" said Ron. "I found out now she was listening in the private conversation when she wasn't supposed to be in coming out in the ground," said Hermione in a rush. Harry had the impression that Hermione had been dying to tell them this for days, but that she has restrained herself in light of everything else that had happened. "How was she doing it?" said Harry at once. "How did you find out?" said Ron, staring at her. "Well, it was you, really, who gave me the idea, Harry," she said. "Did I?" said Harry, perplexed. "How?" "Bugging," said Hermione happily. "But you said they didn't work." "Oh, not electronic bugs," said Hermione. "No, you see, Rita Skeeter," Hermione's voice trembled. "Quite triumph is an unregistered animagus. She can turn—" Hermione pulled a small sealed glass jar out of her bag into a bottle. "You're kidding," said Ron. "You haven't." "She's not." "Oh, yes, she is," said Hermione happily, brandishing the jar at them. Inside were a few twinkling and leaves had once large fat battle. "That's never. You're kidding," Ron whispered, lifting the jar on his eyes. "No, I'm not," said Hermione, beaming. "I caught her on the window sill in the hospital wing. Look very closely and you'll notice the marking around her aniton are exactly like those foul glass she wears." Harry looked and saw that she was quite right. He was remembered something. There was a beetle on the statue night. He heard Hagrid telling Madame Maxim about his mom. "Exactly," said Hermione, "and Victor pulled the beetle out of my hair after we had had our conversation by the lake, and unless I'm very much mistaken, Rita was perched on the windowsill of the deviation class the day your scar hurt. She's been buzzing around for stories all year." "When we saw Malfoy under the tree," said Ron slowly, "he was talking to her in his hand," said Hermione. "He knew, of course. That's how she began getting all those nice little interviews with the Slytherins. They wouldn't care that she was doing something illegal as long as they were giving her horrified stuff about Hagrid." Hermione looked in the glass jar back from Ron and smiled at the beetle with Basil angrily against the glass. "I have told her I'll let her out when we get back to London," said Hermione. "I have put the unbreakable charm on the jar, you see, so she can't transfer, and I have told her she has to keep her quill to herself for a whole year. If she can't break the habit of writing horrible lies about people." Smiling serenely, Hermione placed the beetle back into her school bag. The door of the compartment slid open. Very clever, Granger, said Draco Malfoy. Crabbe and Goyle were standing behind him. All three of them looked more pleased and themselves more arrogant and more menacing than Harry had ever seen. So, said Malfoy slowly, advancing slightly into the compartment and looking slowly around at them, at Smith quivering on his lips. You caught some pathetic reporter and Potter, Dumbledore's favorite boy again. Big deal. His smirk widened, Grab and Goyle leaned, trying not to think about it. Are we? Said Malfoy softly, looking around at all three of them, trying to pretend it hasn't happened. Get out, said Harry. He had not been this close to Malfoy since he had watched him muttering to Grab and Goyle during Dumbledore's speech about Cedric. He could feel a kind of ringing in his ear. His hand gripped his hand one under his robe. You have picked the losing side, Potter. I warn you. I told you, you ought to choose your company more carefully, remember? When we meet on the train first day at Hogwarts. I told you not to hang around with riffraff like this. He jerked his head at Ron and Hermione. Too late now, Potter. They'll be the first to go. Now the Dark Lord back, mudbloods and muggle lovers first. While second degree was it was as though someone had exploded a box of firework within the compartment, blinded by the blaze of spells that had blasted from every direction. Defended by a series of bangs, Harry blinked and looked down at the floor. Malfoy, Crabbe and Goyle were lying unconscious in the doorway. He, Ron and Hermione were on their feet, all three of them having used a different hex, nor were they the only ones to have done though we had see what those three were up to, said Fred matter-of-factly, stepping into Goyle and into the compartment. He had his wand out, and so did George, who was carefully to tread on Malfoy as he followed Fred's inside. Interesting effect, said George, looking down at Crabbe, who used funiculars curse. Me, said Harry. Odd, said George lightly. I used jelly legs. Looked as though those two shouldn't be mixed. It seemed to have sprouted little tentacles all over his face. Well, let's not leave them here. They don't add much to the decor. Ron, Harry, and George kicked roll and pushed the unconscious Malfoy, Grab, and Goyle, each of whom looked distinctly the worse for the jumble of jinxes with which they had been hit, out of the corridor, then come back into the compartment and roll the door shut, exploding snap. Anyone? Said Fred, pulling out the pack of cards. They were halfway through their fifth game when Harry decided to ask them. You're going to tell us then, he said to George, who you are blackmailing. Oh, said George darkly. That it doesn't matter, said Fred, shaking his head impatiently. It wasn't anything important, not now, anyway. We have given up, said George, struggling. But Harry, Ron, and Hermione kept on asking, and finally Fred said, all right, if you really want to know. It was Ludo Bagman. Bagman, said Harry sharply. Are you saying he was involved in? Nah, said George gloomily. Nothing like that, stupid git. He wouldn't have brain. Well, what then? Said Ron. Fred hesitated and said, you remember that date we had with him at Quidditch World Cup about how Ireland would win but Crump wouldn't get the snitch? Yeah, said Harry and Ron slowly. Well, the gate paid us in Umpersion gold he had caught for the Irish mascot. So, so said Fred impatiently. It vanished, didn't it? The next morning it had gone, but it must have been an accident. Said George. George laughed and said, yeah, that's what they thought first. They thought we thought if we just wrote to him and told him he had made a mistake. He caught up, but nothing doing, ignored our letter. We kept trying to talk to him about it at Hogwarts, but he was always making some excuse to get away from us. In the end, he turned pretty nasty, said Fred, told us we were too young to gamble and he wasn't giving us anything, so we asked for our money back, said George, glowering. He didn't refuse, gasped Hermione. Write it on, said Fred. But that was all your savings, said Ron. Tell me about it, said George. Of course, we found out that was going on in the end. Lee Jordan's dad had had a bit of trouble getting money of Bagman as well. Turned out he is big trouble with the goblin. Borrowed loan of gold of them. A gang of them cornered him in a wood after the World Cup, and all the gold he had, it still wasn't enough for all his debt. They followed him all the way to Hogwarts to keep an eye on him. He's lost everything gambling, hasn't got two gallons to rub together. And you know how the idiot tried to pay Goblin back. How, said Harry. He put a bet on you, mate, said Fred. Put a big bet on you to win the tournament. Bet against the goblins so that why he kept trying to help me win, said Harry. Well, I did win, didn't I? So he can pay your gold. Nope, said George, shaking his head. The goblin play as dirty as him. They say you drew with degree and Bagman was betting you had win outright, so Bagman had to run for it. He did run for it right after the third task. George sighed deeply and started dealing out the card again. The rest of the journey passed pleasantly, though enough. Harry wished it could have gone all summer, in fact, and that he would never arrive at Crinkos. But as he had learned and hard way that year, time will not slow down. There's something unpleasant lies ahead, and all too soon, the Hogwarts Express was pulling in platform 9 3/4. The usual confusion and noise filled in the corridor as the students began to dismark. Ron and Hermione struggle are past Malfoy, Grab and Goyle carrying their trunk. Harry, however, stay put, Fred, George, wait a moment. The twin turned. Harry pulled open his trunk and drew out his Triwizard winning. Take it, he said, and he thrust the sack into George's hand. But, said Fred, looking furious. Take it, said Harry, repeated firmly. I don't want it. You're mental, said George, trying to push it back to Harry. No, I'm not, said Harry. You take it and get investment. It's for joke shop. He is mental, Fred said in an almost awed voice. Listen, said Harry firmly. If you don't take it, I'm throwing it down in the drain. I don't want it and I don't need it, but I could do with a few laughs. We could all do with a few laughs. I have got a feeling we are going to need them more than usual before long. Harry said George weakly, winging the money back in his hand. There got to be 1,000 gallons in here. Yeah, said Harry, grinning. Think how many canary cream that is. Twins stared at him. Just don't tell your mom where you got it, although she might not be so keen for you to join the ministry anymore. Come to think of it, Harry, Fred began, but Harry pulled out his wand. Look, he said flatly, take it or I'll hex you. I know some good ones now. Just do me one favor, okay? Buy Ron some different dress, robes, and say they are from you. He left the compartment before they could say any word, stepping over Malfoy, Grab, and Goyle, who were still lying on the floor covered in hex marks. Uncle Vernon was waiting beyond the barrier. Mrs. Weasley was close by him. She hugged Harry very tightly when she saw him and wiped his ear. I think Dumbledore will let you come to us later in summer. Keep in touch, Harry. See you, Harry, said Ron, clapping him on the back. Bye, Harry, said Hermione, and she did something she had never done before and kissed him on the cheek. Harry, thanks, George muttered while Fred nodded frivolently at his side. Harry winked at them, turned to Uncle Vernon, and followed him silently from the station. There was no point worrying yet, he told himself as he got into the back to the Dursleys' car. As Hagrid had said, what would come, and he would have to meet it when it did. That's it for today, and this is the end of this part. See you with the other part very soon. Till then, see you. Bye bye.